My best friend slept with my fiancée while I was working nights to pay for our wedding. And every single person I trusted knew about it before I did. My parents knew. Her sister knew. Our mutual friends knew. They sat around dinner tables and backyard fires talking about my relationship, my future, my humiliation. And not one of them picked up the phone. So I did what nobody expected. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I didn't give any of them the dramatic breakdown they were braced for. I just stopped being someone they could reach. My name is Dax. I was 31 when my life split clean in half. I'm 36 now, and I'm telling this from a kitchen table in Nova Scotia, drinking coffee I made myself, in a house with my name on the deed and nobody else's. That part matters. I'll get to it. I grew up in Mississauga, Ontario. Middle-class neighborhood, the kind where everyone waves from driveways, and borrows each other's tools and pretends life is a shared project. My dad spent 30 years in municipal planning. My mom worked part-time at a dental office until I was in high school. Solid people, I thought. The kind who showed up. I believed that for a long time. I got into civil engineering, graduated from McMaster, and landed a position with an infrastructure firm outside Hamilton, doing structural assessments on bridges and overpasses. The work was unglamorous. Cold in winter, hot in summer, endless paperwork, and the kind of detail-oriented precision that makes most people's eyes glaze over at dinner parties. I liked it. I was good at it. I was the guy who caught the small things before they became the catastrophic things. And I had enough pride in that to keep showing up before anyone else and leave after everyone else. Her name was Cassidy. We met as Cassidy? We met at a friend's birthday at a brewery on King Street West. She was a dental hygienist which my mom thought was cosmically funny given the family history. She was warm in that easy outward way. The kind of person who makes strangers feel interesting. She laughed at things I didn't expect her to laugh at. We dated for 2 years before I proposed, outside the distillery district on a January night that was cold enough to make my fingers shake when I opened the ring box. She said yes, she cried. I thought that meant something. My best friend's name was Donovan. We had been close since our second year at McMaster. He was a personal trainer turned gym co-owner. The kind of guy who looked like he was built for a magazine cover and knew it. But was charming enough that you mostly forgave him for it. He was my best man. He gave a speech at our engagement dinner that made everyone at the table laugh and cry in the same 3 minutes. I bought him a scotch afterward and told him I didn't know what I'd do without him. I know now exactly what I'd do. I'd do better. I was working a contract extension on the gardener assessments. Nights, mostly, because that's when you can actually get onto the structure without shutting down half of downtown. Cassidy and I had been together 5 years by then. The wedding was 11 months away. I was putting away every dollar I wasn't spending because I wanted us to start with no debt. She said she appreciated that. She said she loved that about me. She said a lot of things. I came home one Tuesday at 6 a.m., after a 12-hour shift, to find Donovan's Jeep in our driveway. I want to be precise about what happened in my body at that moment, because it wasn't what you'd expect. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even suspicion. Not at first. It was a very specific coldness, like a circuit breaker tripping. Something in my chest just shut off. I parked down the block and sat in my truck for 20 minutes telling myself the story a person tells when they're about to lose everything and aren't ready to know it. He was dropping something off. He'd had too much to drink and slept on the couch. There was a reasonable explanation. At 6:40, Donovan came out of my house carrying his shoes in one hand. He paused on the step, looked down the street in both directions, and then walked to his Jeep with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't think anyone was watching. I let him drive away. Then I sat in my truck for another 2 hours. When I finally went inside, Cassidy was in the kitchen making eggs. She turned around when she heard the door and the surprise on her face. Just a fraction of a second, just a flicker, was enough. She recovered fast. She smiled. She said she didn't expect me home this early. I said we finished ahead of schedule. I hugged her. She smelled like his cologne. That was the moment I understood the particular cruelty of a good liar. She didn't flinch. She asked if I was hungry. She poured me a coffee. She kissed my cheek and said she'd missed me. I sat at our kitchen table and nodded and smiled and thought, I need to be very careful. I have never in my life done anything without thinking it through. That's engineering. You don't guess at load tolerances. You don't assume the numbers are close enough. You measure, verify, document, and measure again. I applied that to the next 3 weeks of my life. First, I took photos of Donovan's parking spot in our driveway. I had the timestamp on my phone. Then, I started paying attention to things I'd been too trusting to notice before. Gaps in her schedule, vague answers about where she'd been. Small charges on the joint account, at places we'd never been together. I went through our credit card statements back 6 months. Coffee shops in areas neither of us had reason to be. A hotel in Niagara-on-the-Lake. In October, when she'd told me she was at a work conference in Barrie, I didn't check her phone. I didn't need to. The picture was already complete. What I hadn't accounted for was the family dimension. That revealed itself at Easter. Cassidy's family and mine had been folded together in the way long engagements do. Shared holidays, overlapping friend groups, her parents and mine. At the same table. Enough times that it started to feel like the arrangement had always existed. Easter at my parents' house in Mississauga. Everyone there. My mum and her mum. Discussing centerpiece options for the reception. My dad and her dad in the backyard, pretending to care about the state of the grass. My younger sister running interference between the kitchen and the dining room, Cassidy's older sister. Who I'd always found a little brittle but tolerated because family. Hovering around the food like she had a reason to look busy. Donovan was there too. He and I had said almost nothing to each other since that morning. I'd declined a couple of his calls, sent a few texts that were technically responsive but gave him nothing to work with. He thought I was swamped with the project extension. That was fine. Let him think that. What I watched at that Easter table was not the behavior of two people who were nervous about being caught. It was the behavior of two people who had been managed. Donovan and Cassidy barely looked at each other. Not in the way of guilt, but in the practiced way of people who have been coached. And the people doing the coaching were visible if you were looking. My mum caught Cassidy's eye across the table once and gave a small tight nod. Like a signal, like a checkpoint. Her sister found reasons to steer conversation away from the wedding twice. My dad put his hand on my shoulder when we were getting drinks in the kitchen and said, very quietly, that I'd been working too hard, and that stress could put pressure on a relationship that wouldn't otherwise have any. I looked at him. Is that something you're observing? I said. Or something you know? He opened the fridge and didn't answer. That was enough. I excused myself after dinner said. I had early morning calls for work. I drove to my friend Lawrence's house. Lawrence had been at McMaster with us but hadn't stayed in the close circle. He was a tax lawyer now, analytical, quiet and crucially, not attached to any part of my current life. I knocked on his door at 9 o'clock. He opened it, took one look at me and said, come in. I laid everything on his kitchen table. The photos, the account statements, the timeline, the hotel record, the Easter observations. He read it all. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, what do you want to do? I want to leave, I said, completely. And I want to make sure I lose nothing I've built. He became very precise then. Not my friend, my legal resource. We went through it systematically. The condo was in both our names, purchased 2 years prior. I had contributed 60% of the down payment from savings I'd built before we were together. We pulled out the agreement of purchase and sale. Lawrence knew a family law colleague he could call the next morning. The joint savings account had approximately $94,000. I had deposited the majority of it. He walked me through my options carefully, noting what I was legally entitled to, and what would need to be negotiated if it became contested. The engagement ring had been my grandmother's. Non-negotiable, personal property, I would take it back. The vehicle was mine outright. The tools and equipment in the storage unit were mine. The furniture was largely mine, purchased before she moved in. The wedding deposit, $8,400 split with her family, would be a loss I'd have to absorb or fight for in small claims, and he advised absorbing it. Once you start, he said, there's no unstarting it. There was no unstarting it the morning I sat in my truck on my own street. I said. He nodded and opened a new document. Over the next 10 days, I moved with the same quiet efficiency I used on job sites. I called my bank and opened a new account at a credit union in Burlington. Over 2 legal transfers. Lawrence advised splitting them to avoid flags. I moved my share of the savings. I removed Cassidy as a beneficiary on my life insurance. I contacted my firm's HR department and told them I was interested in any long-term postings outside of Ontario, particularly Atlantic Canada, where I'd heard there was a federal infrastructure push related to coastal resilience projects. Halifax was hiring. I accepted before the week was out. I told Cassidy the project in Hamilton had wrapped and that I was taking a short-term assessment contract in New Brunswick. 3 months, maybe 4. She seemed relieved more than sad. I noted that. I kissed her cheek and said I'd call her once I was settled. She said she loved me. She had no idea. On a Thursday in late April, I drove to a family law office in downtown Hamilton with Lawrence. The paperwork to dissolve the engagement. There is no formal process in Ontario for this, but the condo sale and the return of assets required documentation, was largely civil, efficient. I instructed the office to have formal notice of my intentions sent to Cassidy at her workplace. She called 11 minutes after the courier arrived. I didn't answer, then her sister, then my mom, then Donovan, which I found almost impressive for its audacity. By end of day I had 14 missed calls, and more texts than I counted. I read the subject lines without opening the messages, and then set the phone face down on the seat beside me and drove to Nova Scotia. I want to be honest about what that drive was. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't the liberating movie moment where the protagonist rolls the windows down and breathes free air, and the music swells. It was 11 hours of flat highway, and Tim Horton stops, and a lot of silence in which I became aware That I was genuinely alone for the first time in 5 years, and that alone felt different from lonely. And I didn't know yet which one it was going to be. I arrived in Dartmouth on a Friday evening. I had a short-term furnished rental booked near the waterfront. Nothing remarkable. Clean, functional. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the harbor lights through the window and thought about the fact that nobody in this city knew anything about me. That felt oddly like something the Halifax work was demanding. Coastal infrastructure assessment has its own particular logic. The relationship between salt and steel is not kind, and climate projections were adding variables to structural models that hadn't been updated in decades. I was useful. I worked hard. My team was competent and expected directness, and had no patience for anything else. Which suited me completely. The people in my old life tried different approaches as weeks went by. My mum moved from hurt to anger, to something that read as guilt. Her text shortened and became less argumentative. My dad sent exactly one email that said he wanted to talk when I was ready, and I respected the restraint of it enough to note that I received it. Cassidy cycled through versions of herself, furious, then wounded, then matter-of-fact, in a way that confirmed she had moved on faster than she wanted to admit. Donovan sent 3 messages in the first month and then stopped. I found his silence more interesting than his messages. It was the silence of a person who knows exactly what they did. What I hadn't fully prepared for was my sister. Avery was 26 at the time. We weren't especially close in the way siblings with a 5-year gap often aren't. But we liked each other. She sent me a voice note about 6 weeks after I left that was so different from everything else I was receiving that I listened to it twice. She said, "I found out the night before Easter. Mum told me because she needed someone to talk to, and she swore me to silence, because she thought she was protecting you from finding out before the wedding. I should have told you immediately. I didn't, and I've felt sick about it since. I'm not asking you to respond. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry, and that I know it was wrong." I sat with that for 2 days, then I called her. Not to forgive, not to restore anything, but because she was the only person in the entire situation who had told me the truth without being caught first, and that distinction mattered to me. "How long did our parents know?" I asked her. She was quiet. "Mum found out in February. I think Dad knew by March. 2 months. They'd had 2 months and a front row seat to me working double shifts to build a life for a woman who was using the schedule I'd built to spend time with my best friend." I thanked Avery for the message. I told her I needed more time, but that I didn't hold it against her the way I held it against the others. That was true. I still believe it was the right distinction to make. The condo sold in June. A young couple from Brampton, first-time buyers. I hope they're happy there, genuinely. After fees and the mortgage balance, my share came to approximately $67,000. Combined with what I'd moved to Burlington, my financial position was considerably better than I'd expected. Clean, unentangled. Lawrence handled everything remotely. He was precise, fast, and charged me fairly. He also, at the close of the final transaction, sent me a one-line message that said, "You did this right." I saved that one. The condo sale triggered a renewed round of contact. Her sister sent a message that combined genuine grief with strategic argument, in proportions that suggested she'd drafted it multiple times. My mum called 7 times in 3 days. My dad sent a longer email, considered, not aggressive, asking if I understood the consequences of permanent estrangement, and whether I was certain this was what I wanted. I read that email 4 times. I wanted to be fair. Then I thought about the kitchen at Easter. The fridge door opening and closing instead of an answer. The too much stress speech. I was certain. 8 months after arriving in Halifax, I was offered a permanent role with the Regional Infrastructure Office, Coastal Resilience Team, Senior Assessment Position, Federal Pay Scale. It was more than I'd been making in Hamilton. I accepted. I found a 2-bedroom house in a quiet part of Dartmouth. Old neighborhood, well maintained, close enough to the water that on clear mornings you could see across the harbor to Halifax proper. I bought it outright. Cash, no mortgage. There's a particular quiet that comes with signing your name on a document that gives you a piece of land and owes no one else a word of explanation. I stood on the front step afterward and looked at the street for a long time. Nobody knew I was there. That still felt like something. By that point I'd decided it felt like freedom. In the second year I met Iris through a colleague at a work site near Lunenburg. She was a marine biologist with Parks Canada, precise, self-sufficient, and deeply uninterested in performing warmth for social benefit. We met at a work dinner, where she argued a technical point with the regional director, with such calm certainty that I found myself listening more carefully to her than to anyone else at the table. We talked for 2 hours after the dinner ended. She didn't ask about my past. I didn't offer it. On our 3rd evening together she said, "I've noticed you don't talk about your family." "No. Is that going to stay that way?" "Probably." She nodded. "All right." And changed the subject to a paper she was reading about tidal erosion pattern. I thought then that this was someone who understood the difference between curiosity and entitlement. and that it was rare, and that I should pay attention. I did. I turned on the old phone once, about 14 months after leaving Ontario. I had to charge it for an hour first. It was completely dead. When it came back on, the number of notifications was enough that I didn't try to count them. I scrolled slowly through the names: Cassidy, Mum, Dad, Donovan, her sister, distant relatives who apparently found my number in the chaos, family friends I'd known since childhood, people who had eaten in our house at Christmas, texting me to weigh in on a situation they knew about, only because my private life had become communal property without my consent. Cassidy's messages were what I expected. Anger first, then hurt, then something quieter and more complicated, around month 4 that read like someone arriving at an honest reckoning for the first time. In one message she wrote, "I think I knew you'd do something like this. Not because you're cruel, because you take things seriously, and I forgot what it meant to be taken seriously by someone like you." I read that twice. Then I turned the phone off and put it back in the box. I don't know what to do with something like that. Not because it didn't land, but because it arrived approximately 14 months. Too late to mean anything actionable. I believed she was telling the truth. I also believed that the truth was hers to manage now, and not mine to carry. The part that took longest wasn't Cassidy. It was Donovan. I had known Donovan for 9 years. He was at my graduation dinner. He helped me move twice. He talked me out of a bad career decision in 2019 and into a better one. He knew things about me that I'd told nobody else. When I thought about the friendship, not what he did, but the friendship itself, I felt a kind of grief that didn't have clean edges. It wasn't rage. Rage would have been easier. It was the particular sadness of losing something you can't replace, that didn't have to be broken, and that was broken anyway, by someone's choice to take a thing that wasn't his. He sent me a final message about a year in. 2 sentences. "I know you've seen these. I know you're not. I just need you to know I'm sorry. I think about it every day. I'm not asking for anything." That was 4 sentences. I counted. I didn't respond. But I kept the message for reasons I couldn't fully explain to myself at the time. I understand it better now. It was the only moment in the entire aftermath where someone said exactly what the moment required and asked nothing in return. And even in the context of everything he'd done, that distinction was legible to me. It didn't change anything, but I'm honest enough to note it. My father wrote me a letter at year 2, physical letter in the mail. His handwriting, I hadn't seen it in so long that for a second I thought it was someone else's envelope. He wrote slowly, clearly, like a man who had been thinking for a long time about precision. He said, "I convinced myself I was protecting you by giving you time before you found out. I told your mother that. I told myself that. I've spent a lot of the last 2 years understanding that I was protecting myself from having to deliver a truth that would cause pain in my presence. That's not the same thing, and I was wrong to conflate them. You trusted me to be the kind of father who put your interest first. I failed that. I'm not writing to ask you to come back. I'm writing because you deserve to hear it said plainly." I read that letter on the front step of my Dartmouth house on a November morning. Cold. Clear sky. The kind of morning that makes Nova Scotia feel like the edge of the world, in a way that isn't menacing but clarifying. My hand didn't shake. But I sat there for a long time. I called Avery that evening. She'd stayed in cautious contact throughout. The occasional text, nothing demanding. I told her I'd gotten Dad's letter. "He spent a month writing it," she said. "Showed it to me twice. Did Mum know he was sending it?" "Yes. Did she write one?" A pause. "She's not there yet." I understood that. My mother had built her identity on being the person who held things together. Admitting that what she'd held together had been assembled at my expense was going to take longer. Maybe it wouldn't happen. I'd made my peace with both outcomes. "Tell him I read it," I said. "Is that all?" Avery said okay. That was the thing I ever sent back through the gap. 3 words relayed through my sister to my father, that I had read what he wrote. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not the door opening. Just confirmation that the message arrived. I thought about it for a long time and decided that was exactly the right amount. Not more, not less. Iris moved into the Dartmouth house in the spring of year 3. She brought research equipment, a bookshelf that needed 2 people to carry, a cast iron pot she was extremely specific about, and a large, entirely gray dog named Franklin who regarded me with professional skepticism for about 6 weeks before deciding I was acceptable. We got married the following September. Small, her colleague from Parks Canada. Lawrence drove down from Hamilton, the only person from my old life present. 2 witnesses and a justice of the peace on a dock near Lunenburg in light rain, that she said was good luck, and I said was just weather. And she said those weren't mutually exclusive. She was right. I'm 36 now. I lead the Coastal Resilience Assessment Team for the regional office. We're 2 years into a 12-year infrastructure renewal project. Bridges, retaining structures, storm drainage systems in communities from Yarmouth to Cape Breton. Work that will be standing after I'm gone, in places where the weather doesn't ask for permission. I still have the old phone in a box in the basement. I haven't turned it on in over a year. Maybe Donovan still sends something occasionally. Maybe Cassidy has moved on entirely. Maybe my mother is where she needs to be. Maybe my dad, who had a health scare last year that Avery mentioned once and I didn't ask about again, is doing alright. I don't know. That's the point. People talk about going no contact like it's a punishment that you inflict. Like silence is a weapon you're aiming at, said someone. It isn't. Or at least it wasn't for me. Silence is what happens when you stop spending energy on people who spent your trust. It's not active. It doesn't require maintenance. It doesn't need feeding in the morning. It's just the natural state of someone who removed themselves from a dynamic that was costing more than it was worth and redirected that energy somewhere honest. My wife and I had coffee this morning on the front step and watched Franklin patrol the yard with the grim focus of a Thasat, who takes perimeter security very seriously. The harbor was visible at the end of the street. November again, same season as that letter. Different year. I thought briefly about all of it. Not with grief, not with anger. The way you think about a place you used to live that you no longer have reason to visit. Neutral, distant, finished. The people I left behind didn't lose me because I was cold. They lost me because warmth requires trust, and trust has to be earned, and none of them, when it came to it, treated it like something worth protecting. I protected it myself, in the end. That's the part they never calculated. They assumed I would absorb it, adjust, eventually accept. They didn't know that the same quality that made me good at my job, the refusal to let a small problem become a structural failure, was going to be the quality that saved me. I caught the crack early. I documented it. I made the call. Some structures can be repaired. Some you condemn and walk away from, before they take anything else down with them. I'm very good at knowing the difference.